Well, we're back. I hope you guys enjoyed last week's episode about starting spring seeds because we're going to do it all over again, but for summer seeds. Well, a little bit of a twist. I don't think we
Mhm.
should regurgitate everything the same, do you?
That was absolutely my plan. Copy and paste. This is
No,
where things get even more interesting, though.
it is. It is. And I think if we get this right, our we can get our garden started in the right direction early. So, it's really
Well, I'm
important.
excited about this set of episodes because we have been striving to get our timing right to release these kind of episodes to continue to help gardeners that are listening.
Right.
And I think that this is like we're spot on this time this year. And
Yeah,
that makes me happy.
absolutely. But before we get started, just want you to know, welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast, everybody. I am Ben. I'm with my co-host Batavia. That's her right there. And if you'd like to support the show, you can do so by becoming a patron or an Apple subscriber. You'll get an extra episode every month, and you'll be helping support the show and keeping us on the air so we can continue to help people garden and in their gardens. Also, you can buy some seeds from us. I believe you've got a couple days to use the code YBBBB to get yourself a discount. And we have all kinds of seeds available, so please feel free to do so. And check out our Amazon list. As we start talking about seeds and growing them and stuff like that, we have all of our equipment on there that we use. If you buy from there, it does help support the show at no extra cost to you, so please do so.
Hmm.
Mm, somebody's got a
Oh
piece of
no.
paper stuck up
There you
underneath it.
go.
There it is.
Cobwebs.
There it is. You know, that bell that you found is just like, wasn't it just laying around your house?
No, no. I have two cowbells. Those are throwback episodes.
Yeah.
I actually have one that's like literally within reach, a cowbell, but we had to bring it down a notch. So I actually did go onto the interweb and order
Okay.
this bell some years
It would have
back.
been super weird
Just
if you just had it
that
laying
all
around.
conversations. Say again.
It would have been super weird if it was just laying around your house. I couldn't
Yeah,
remember. It's
yeah.
been so long.
Batavia After Dark. But I do use it to that end in
Yeah.
other conversations that I have. So there's that.
So we, I'm trying to think. We last episode we really talked about first and last frost dates and all that stuff.
Mhm.
So if you want to know how to start your spring seeds, your cool season crops, by all means do so. Check that out, and that'll give you the framework for this. But really, what we're talking about now is that we're going to be talking about your core summer vegetables, the stuff that you're going to be growing throughout the warm season, the summer in your garden, and getting them started at the right time, I think, is crucial to a garden. What do you think?
I do. I think that generally speaking, gardeners have there's a little bit more play. There's more like you have more things that you can direct sow that really take well for summer crops. You have clearly things that while we focus on seed starting, and that's what this episode is about, you have more opportunity to purchase transplants if you want. I know that you cringe every time I say that in a seed starting episode. So you have a little bit more room, right, to be a little bit later. I do know, though, personally, you'll be happier as a gardener if you take advantage of the time that we're giving now. So we're in February talking about summer plants, heat loving crops. And it's right on time for me. And it could be just a couple of days later than being would normally get started, right? So that tells you how important the timing around these summer crops are.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking, so first of all, Batavia, tomorrow is Valentine's Day. So happy stupid Valentine's Day to everybody. Go buy a card and spend a bunch of money on nothing. But
Happy Love Day,
yeah,
young Ben.
we don't do cards in our house. I might get my wife a little gift, but we don't really celebrate Valentine's Day. It's a Hallmark holiday.
Mhm.
But you're exactly right. I
My
am.
lonely heart says, "Oh, ah, oh, you know, I'll take some of those hard candies that I'm
I'll
so
get David to
sorry.
make you a, card and send it to you.
My PO box is on my Be Better Garden
Easy
YouTube
killer.
channel
You
if
never know
someone
what
wants
you're
to
gonna get
see.
in
I
there.
know. Be careful.
You never know. There might
Please
be
no
some.
pictures.
There might be some photos you can't frame.
Well, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I mean, seriously, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. If we're obviously recording this a little bit before, but if not, I am right around my seed starting time. I've already started my pepper seeds, but I am actively at this moment starting everything else, and it's in motion at this point. We are on the entrance ramp into the highway, and there is no way to stop at this point because it's the last frost date's coming. So I do think planning to start seeds is a hell of a lot easier this time for this season than it is spring, don't you?
I agree. I had this visual of the wrong way sign. Yeah, if you've seen, the entrance to some expressways where you could go either you're going on or people are coming off. And so when you're like, we're on the entrance rep, I'm like, are we going the wrong way? Um, so no, there are two pieces here. There are two types of gardeners in this moment, and this isn't your tag forever. But in this moment, you are a gardener that is starting your summer crops, the seeds now, and you have already started your spring, right? Or you're a gardener that is only starting crops for summer, only starting seeds for summer. Of course, there are people that aren't doing any of them, but this episode is about seed starting. And so the approach you take is slightly different depending on if you're a gardener group A or gardener group B. But in any case, the summer things are, it seems easier in my mind. They're
Yeah,
less sensitive when it comes to being indoors than some of these cool weather crops.
they are. And you ever thought about that? Why that is? I have a theory.
Because my house is warm and these things enjoy
Yeah.
heat. And the things from the spring are like, really? Do you know how expensive your gas bill is going to be if you keep on cranking the heat up in this house? And do you know that I am not going to survive?
so,
That's what the plants are saying to me.
so they're just sitting there like yelling at you to save money. Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, so I think, and we should have discussed this before the show, but what do you think, Batavia, about us kind of, again, going along with the same progress of like knowing when to start your seeds, but really getting into the order of the seeds, and this is where you get a lot of seeds that can go a month in a seed pot too. The
Mhm.
last one there was a handful, but there
Yeah,
are
yeah.
quite a few now that can. And then really touching on direct sowing a little bit. Do you want to do that a little bit too?
Yeah, absolutely, because the reason why this is one of the reasons why this is different beyond the plants that we're talking about enjoy and thrive in warmer weather and even die depending on how cold the weather could be outside, right? That's one of the reasons. But we open ourselves up for starting many of these things indoors. But there again, there are a number of things that can both be started indoors as well as direct sowed. And so that's a balance I've been really trying to strike. Generally speaking, for me, it's been preference, not necessarily. But yeah, I want to dig into all of those things.
Well, there you go. We made a plan right on there. There you go. Totally organic show. I'm telling you, people, it's organic. No
Mark
synthetics
it
here.
down.
Yeah.
I normally never agree with what do you think about
There's been
going
times
off script
there's been
and
times when I've asked that and immediately been like, "Ooh, shouldn't have said that." But no, so again, to kind of recap slightly, um your zone doesn't matter. The most important thing is that you know your first and last frost dates. And so for this one, we're going to talk about I'm not going to mess it up this time, your last frost date. So it's really important that you focus on your last frost date and you start to count back. That's really important. You want to count back from there to really figure this out. And this is why I brought up wanting to talk about, the order to start seeds, because there is a number of seeds that can go only a month at most in a seed pot before you risk getting root bound and stuff like that. There's some really aggressive plants for this time of year. And when I say aggressive, it doesn't necessarily mean that they spread. And what I'm saying is that one, they're just bigger plants, but two, they will grow fast.
Hmm.
And you
Hmm.
got to be really careful. So you don't
So
want to get anything too root bound in your house.
the average last frost date for spring, we're using that to gauge about how much earlier can you plant these things out, right?
Right.
I can plant these things out X weeks before my average last frost date. For our summer plants, which this show is going to focus on, this is the be very careful about planting these before, and in almost all cases the recommendation is to wait until after this date has passed, your average last frost date, before you plant them. And in that case for summer, it's about like live or die, right? So these plants, because they're heat loving and they don't necessarily tolerate the colder weather that some are expected to get when it comes to their average last frost date, we want to basically wait until there's some safety that we feel with our weather, right? There's a less likely chance that you're going to get into a weather situation that's going to do harm to these plants.
When you talk about this and this set of seeds and your last frost date, what does your last frost date tell you for those seeds when you start them? Like what on that last frost date, what is your goal to be doing with those seeds by then?
Um, the best version of me as a gardener, what I like to do versus what I actually do. So that last frost date signals to me the chance of a frost coming in is very unlikely. And based on that, the concept is your weather is warming up in a way that, because 32 is the demarcation for, we're getting down to frost and freezing, right? 35 degrees could be a problem for me and my summer plants,
Right.
right? So I am getting these seedlings, I should say, geared up for their trip outdoors in the next couple of weeks. That's me in my garden. So average last frost date, we used April the 15th last week in the episode. Using that same date, I'm looking at these next couple of weeks, these summer plants that I've been nurturing, they're going to be making their trip outdoors to get hardened off. So I may be in a position where I'm not fertilizing at that point, right? I'm getting ready to get some things outdoors. And even if we're starting the harden off process for a few minutes, I'm of course watching my weather as well. So there's that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And just to make it a little bit confusing, I think this is going to be the confusing part of it. I got this sun coming in right here. It's going to be terrible for the video, but that's all right. Check us out on YouTube if you're not. Um, Frost dates. We do have to have a little bit of a conversation about printed frost dates. Um, there's 3 frost dates for every place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so that's the
You
second,
love bringing this up.
but
I
it's
hate bringing
important.
this
I
up.
hate bringing it up too, but it's important, and it's funny. It's the second time in the episode that you've looked at me like something painful just came out of my mouth.
Mhm.
But and it's typically not seen, but you can get, if you find the right website, there's 3 frost dates. There's an 80%, a 50%, and then I think it goes down to like 20 or 10% after that frost date. Um, the 50%, I mean, it's just what it says. There's an 80% chance there's going to be a frost, and then so on and so forth. So just be very careful. But typically, places like the Farmer's Almanac, stuff like that, they give you that 20% last frost date. But the important thing to remember is just because you're not getting a frost, it's just like Batavia said. She was exactly right. It can be 35 degrees. Well, that's not good for a tomato plant, especially a baby tomato plant that came out of your 68-degree house with perfect
Mhm.
temperatures day and night. That's not really where you want to be. So we do want to be mindful of that. And we'll definitely get into the differences between Batavia's frost date time in mind because they are completely different. But I like that frost date would be considered a time to harden off. I think that should
Mhm.
be, it's a moving goal. Again, we need to be fluid to kind of pair with the last episode, but to be able to do that, I think is really important and take it and say, hey, we're going to work with April 15th because that's the happy medium for us. And that's our fake frost date, just so you guys know. Y'all can pick your frost date and apply it anywhere. But at that date, that's my goal is to begin the hardening off process at minimum and to get right into the differences between you and I, Batavia. I can already be hardening off up to a month before that, but every single year on that frost date, I get a frost. And so I need to be very, very careful. And I can tell you, as somebody who sells seedlings, how many times I have sold somebody a tomato plant because they didn't understand and they went out and they planted their tomatoes a month before the frost date and the frost came and they could not keep up with it and they could not save them. And or real quick, the amount of people that have come to me and said, "Hey, I planted them out. I was able to get them through the frost, but they're stunted." And we're now into June into July, and they're trying to replace tomato plants, and that's not where we want to be.
Yeah. So when you talk about we're not planting early enough, do you feel like you're focused on what I hear when you say that is primarily these cool weather crops in the spring and really the cool weather crops in the fall? I think generally speaking, there are opportunities to plant heat loving crops earlier, but you have to take special care with that. What do you think?
Um,
Go earlier, go earlier. Is there a particular season or type of crops, or are you just kind of across the board saying that?
so hold on, let me. Is there a psychologist couch in here I can lay on real quick? So I'm gonna be one thing that I try to do on my YouTube channel and all that is I try to be totally honest, and I'm gonna do that right now. And yes, there is a time. So I think across the board, people are not planting their spring crops early enough. And I also think that people are planting their summer crops too early. Now,
Mm-hmm.
here's the difference in where I sit. If I go onto this podcast or I go onto YouTube and I say, you're planting your tomatoes too early, guess what's going to happen? Unsubscribe, unsubscribe, unfollow, unfollow.
Sure.
People don't want to
Mm-hmm.
hear that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. So live and let learn. And I think it's just like with starting your cool season crops earlier. I think you can get away with it, but you
Mm-hmm.
got to be really careful this time of year because sometimes you don't notice it until, again, a month later. And you're like, why isn't my plant growing? And it's like, well, because half of the roots died when you got to
Yeah.
35 degrees. You didn't
I
take those
think
steps and you didn't do it appropriately.
I think there is fine print under every episode. There's fine print under every video on YouTube when we talk about these things. When we're saying that this is what is considered a standard, and then we're saying we believe you can do something different, there is also the fine print of, but be prepared for some potential loss, right? So if you're going to plant your tomato plants after your average last frost date, but earlier than you normally do, if you got 3 tomato plants you plan on planting, maybe only try 1 of them to begin with. If you have 10, maybe only try 2 or 3 of them. And gauge throughout the season how those 2 or 3 perform compared to the ones that you planted maybe closer to what you normally do. The caution that we're asking you to take is a great point about you may not come out to a dead tomato plant in at the end of April with that April 15th last frost date. But you may end up, we had this question last week under a different circumstance. You may end up with a stunted plant, and it may take you many weeks to realize that that's the case. I want to toss this out to confuse matters more. There are kind of old wives' tales, so a couple of things to note. If you go to the garden centers, which I do, I frequent them in the spring, especially. In the summer, I'm a little bit busier, but in the summer too. In Chicago, you're never in March going to see the seedlings, the transplants they're selling outside. They're going to always be in the interior of the store or like if they have an enclosed garden center that where the doors are closed in March, that's what you're going to see. In April, you may start to see things that, are a bit more outside, but guess what they are? They're cool weather crops.
Yeah.
And once we get closer to the end of April and May, when we get to summer plants, you better believe that no one wants a whole shelf of plants dying because someone didn't pull them in. So that's one indicator. Another indicator, and maybe this is probably more like the north where we kind of use this. Let's use our pretend average first frost date, excuse me, last frost date of mid-April. Some folks in the north, in the Midwest in particular, have even May frost dates. You'll see people that say, "Oh, I don't put my flowers out." Think annual. Let's on the same guise as it's sensitive to the cool weather until Mother's Day. Mother's Day generally gets like the first going into the second week of May. So I'm weeks now. Now, again, that's being much more conservative when it comes to what you're planting out. And the difference between last week and this week is we're not racing for many of these vegetables against weather conditions that will say create an issue with the plant we're growing. This isn't broccoli where we're racing against the heat. Your season for summer, generally speaking, is going to be a little bit longer. There are a couple of vegetables that I feel like the earliest you can get them out, the better off you are, but we'll cover off on that separately.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I don't know where you stand on this. I think it might be good to flush this out a little bit. You said something about being more conservative about putting your plants in the ground, stuff like that. But do you think, Batavia, that there's really an issue with trying to like test it out, push it a little bit, and see like, hey, can I get this out earlier? If like with a flower and you're putting it out on Mother's Day, I mean, why not the week before? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, I think Mother's Day is like the 8th or the 9th this year. So that would be 3 weeks after, about 3 weeks after the last frost date. Um, why not split the difference? I said when people are planting at Mother's Day, they're being more conservative.
Yeah.
And to the point of if you have 3 tomato plants, maybe try planting one of them early because you only know when you know. That's the thing when we talk about these dates that we're starting.
Right.
You could have a written start date for these, a written planned planting out date for these, but you only know if you could go earlier if you go earlier,
Yeah.
you know.
So it's funny. The lady up the street from me, she's got a big garden. She's the one that we've talked about before, where she eats it, she
Mhm.
plants it.
Mhm.
When she plants her summer garden, mine's already like up weeks ahead because they wait for, Mother's Day or whatever. So,
Mhm.
it's this whole thing, and it's like I see it, and I mean she has a fantastic garden, but at the same time, like you get a little bit earlier, but they don't want to listen. So I'm like, hey, it's cool, don't worry about it. But there's a lot of things that we can do, and the equation is the same for this. It's 8 weeks from your last frost date. But what we've kind of determined is that 8 weeks, what that should really trigger is a hardening off process, right? And so let's do two things, Batavia. Um, let's do the, what do you think about just going through now and saying, hey, these are the 8 week plants, and then do the 4 week plants. And then we'll get into the hardening off process for these plants because, again, if it's 35 degrees, we got to be very careful.
Yeah, yeah. I think and there are probably 2 or 3 outliers from the 8 weeks, and it's not quite 4 weeks, so okay.
Yeah. So the longest one is peppers, right?
That's one of the outliers,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the I'm trying to I think that may well there's another outlier, but yeah, that's almost 12 to 10 weeks ahead, right? So at
I felt really good about starting peppers both mid-March, which means that they're not going into my garden until, maybe Memorial Day here in the States. That's at the end of May. So that puts you right on line of, more like 10, 11, 12 weeks of growing indoors. I've also started peppers many weeks before that. So there is that. Peppers are going to be my first heat loving crop to start.
Now, I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but why are you waiting until Memorial Day to put them in the ground?
So I got all kinds of garden projects that I'm doing. It's not me sitting and watching and saying everything can go in the ground. I'm just going to wait. It's I'm at the store buying lumber. I'm buying mulch. I'm transplanting.
Yeah.
The walkways, and I'm doing all kinds of things that are ultimately delaying my planting, which is a good opportunity to take the moment of why the press to plant earlier. Well, it's because I want to get the fruits of my labor earlier. Like
Well,
that's.
I want to put a pin in that comment that I just made because I don't, for the record, think that you're necessarily wrong waiting that long to put them in the ground. I think you could probably put them in a little bit earlier, but
Mhm.
there is a
It's
purpose.
definitely safe.
Yeah. And that's what we want to focus on too, as we'll come back to that. But let's go down the list a little bit more. So, is there another outlier for more than 8 weeks that you can think of? I can only think of one, maybe.
Um, what do you think about sweet potato slips if you're starting those
Oh,
indoors?
that's a whole different class. That's a whole different class. I mean, that's like, that's, yeah. Okay. Um, yeah,
I'd say from my experience, eggplants, they seem to be very slow,
yeah,
very similar to peppers in how slow they are, both to come up and then to actually put on some real growth.
yeah, that was
So I'm
the
gonna say
other
they're on the
outlier.
than 8 weeks bucket.
Yeah, I don't think that they are an outlier because they take a long time to germinate like peppers do. Um, I think, like you said, they're just slow and it's
Mhm.
incredibly frustrating to grow
Well, you know
them.
what? Let's piggyback off. Let's go back a second.
Okay.
So peppers are so much earlier than these other crops. I think it's a mixed bag. Some peppers, sweets, I find germinate, 7, 10, maybe 11, 12 days. Hot peppers can take 3 weeks to germinate,
Yeah.
right? And then in both instances, once you get those true leaves, so you're not in the cotyledon stage. We're just going to keep on saying that wrong if it's wrong. You're past the point of those first two leaves that come up. The next sets of leaves and the sets of leaves after that are just slower, it seems, for peppers. So that's why, like, I feel really good about a 12-week head start for them. And I do believe the same idea of for the eggplant, if you're starting those, so slow to really kind of produce a sizable plant. And
Yeah.
that also depends on what size you want your plants to go into the garden at. So you kind of have to balance that. And this is one of those things where experience is going to be your teacher there.
Yeah.
I've put peppers in the garden that have three true leaves, four true leaves. And I put peppers in the garden that, it's already 2 feet tall,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and I'll say this too, as we get through this all the way up until we get to the 1 month plants, all of these plants can benefit from an up potting one time.
Mhm.
I'm a big proponent of one time, not, you know,
Excellent point. Yeah.
keep going, but up until the 1 month section. And then, obviously you get your tomatoes. So
Hmm.
tomatoes are obviously 8 weeks. And
Hmm.
I'm pretty
Agreed.
solid on the 8 weeks on that. I don't think they need much more than that. Um, what about anything else that's 8 weeks for you?
So tomatoes, I think it's important because tomatoes are one of those that if you go beyond or longer than 8 weeks, they can really outgrow your growing area and be more of a nuisance than
Yeah.
than you really want to deal with. So I think that's a sweet spot for tomatoes. Yeah. So 8 weeks. I mean, I think that you're always asking me for pushing me for one more, and then it's the one more you don't want. So I think some of the herbs, you know, I think some of the herbs like your basil, obviously you can direct sow basil as well.
Yeah.
But that's a good example of something that I'd be starting somewhere close to my tomato, so closer to 8 weeks.
Yeah, I think herbs are, especially like you said, basil. I can tell you that with basil, so until we started packaging seeds to sell, link below, um, I I had forgotten that they're basically dust. And
Hmm.
one year I
Hmm.
poured them all into, I mean, they just kind of like came out and they came into one seed cell tray, a whole packet of them. And what I ended up doing is just letting them grow. And then I would take them and pick off pieces, and each piece would have like 10 plants in it from the
Hmm.
seed cell. And then I started more from that and they did great. I mean, it was really easy. So, yeah, I think that's, um, I think that's a good one. And really, when it gets into it too, you can start looking at stuff like okra. It's definitely not 8 weeks, but that's like a weird bridge one where
Mm-hmm.
6 weeks to 4 weeks
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and even a great direct sow candidate on top of
Yeah.
that, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot of the 4 week plants are all going to be direct sow candidates as well. So, and when I say candidates, it's not like you could do it. It's like you're almost just as good to do it as you are to start it inside, depending on what you want.
I think your growing area challenges you may have had in prior years really dictates what makes sense, your schedule, how much time you have now versus later. So if it's your first time planting these things, starting these things, I say give it a go and start them indoors. But also, if you have room, direct sow some things and see which plants do better. I know that's something we commonly say. I believe, generally speaking, a plant that has started in the soil directly where it's going to grow is going to perform better than something that's introduced to the soil. It has less work to do to acclimate because, again, it was born there, right? But the conditions that we're gardening in don't always make that the easiest route,
Right.
right? So for me in particular, a good example is a melon, any melon plants, right? Those are your 4 week kids. And what I found is I have trouble getting things to, once they've germinated, live past those first couple of cotyledon leaves and really kind of produce. And remember, I'm also coming from a place where I have other things growing in the garden at that time.
Right.
So for me, it's easier for me to take a plant. I know what it is. I've started from seed indoors and then transplant that in.
Right.
That's the best version of me.
Yeah, I agree
When
with
I
you.
say that, that means I don't always do it.
So I agree with you that direct sowed plants will typically do better. The question really becomes is that plant have enough time to do what it wants to do in order to give yourself the appropriate harvest for your garden? Okra is a really fast grower and it's a heavy, heavy producer. I mean, it produces very heavy, so that's absolutely one. But like a tomato, you can absolutely direct sow anything, but a tomato takes a long time. Yes, Batavia.
I wish that we could just push a replay button. Is it going to have enough time to do what it needs to do in the garden? Paraphrasing what you just said. That's so critical across the board.
Yeah.
Across the board. Does it have enough time to produce in the best version of itself? Broccoli in the spring, we've talked about that. We didn't say that directly, but that's what we're talking about. The reason why many people in the Midwest aren't direct sowing tomatoes is because if you look at an 8 week growing period, if you have 8 weeks from May 1st, I may not have time to really get the full production.
Yeah.
If I'm in, let's say, May, June, July, my plant is finally getting to the same size outdoors, maybe a little bit bigger than it would have been if I would have planted it directly 2 months prior. So I'm in July 1st and I'm just getting to a 1.5 foot tomato plant.
Yeah.
I only have July, August, September really for that plant to produce. So I'm just going to get a head start. And that's the reason why I'm starting something like a tomato indoors.
Absolutely. I mean, same with peppers. I mean, you can, I mean, how many times have you let something just sit on the ground or on the plant, it falls, and then you get volunteers, and they absolutely will grow, but it takes a real, I mean, imagine an eggplant, my God, you'd have to wait 2 years for it to finally do anything after it comes out of the cold. I mean, it's ridiculous. So you start thinking about that, and it's, does it have enough time? Um, I know I've said this before, but I was a couple years ago, I was going turkey hunting, and I saw these buses that were cut in half. They were like giant flatbeds, and I saw people like piling out of them into the fields, and they all were planting. They had hands full of crops, like seedlings, and I didn't know what they were. And I was like, "Well, what is that?" Well, I didn't pull over and ask them. I just kind of, as I drove by, I watched. They were planting corn like that. They had started corn and they were, planting out instead of direct sowing the seed. Now, these aren't huge farms around my house, but, they're a couple acres, something like that. And, it was the same thing. They wanted to make sure they had the time and they had the germination to get it in. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's the same with the tomatoes. You want to make time. I mean, I could put a tomato seed in the ground and easily get a harvest within one season. But if I start them in my house, I can get a full harvest and then turn
Yeah.
around and get a second harvest out of it, doubling the production and then getting a fall crop planted in the same space in the same year. So
Yeah.
you can see there's definitely a benefit to that. But getting back to what we were talking about, the 1 month plants. So these, you don't really want to keep them anywhere longer than a month in a seed starting pot. The first one's going to be your squashes. I think that's hands down. You got
Hmm.
one?
Hmm. Summer squash, zucchini,
Yeah.
any of your patty pan like summer squash,
Yeah. Melons, cucumbers are a good one. Uh,
pumpkins you
pu-
throw in there. Yeah.
Pumpkins, absolutely. And, winter squashes, all that stuff. And even still, I think okra falls right in line with that too. Um,
Yeah.
Okra is a real complicated little plant if you think
It
about
it
it.
so
And little is not really the word to use for it. Did you hear about the world record okra in North Carolina this year?
no, I didn't.
19 feet tall.
Oh
I think
wow.
she broke the
Wow.
record. She was harvesting it every day with a ladder.
Wow. The only other thing it's I think sunchokes and sunflowers are the only thing I've seen people online like with a ladder trying to tend
Yeah.
to. And is how often you're harvesting okra? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You wonder at that point when it's grown that way how edible they are. I have to look that up now.
Well, I think you just get to a point where like I just want to break the record. I don't care.
Yeah, yeah,
You
maybe
know.
so, maybe so.
Um,
The 4 weeks and the reason why there are 4 weeks are a couple of different reasons. Some of them, like, they don't necessarily transplant the best, so there's idea of they grow so fast, they may get root bound, and that's the reason why you want them to be younger going into the garden, and if it's only 4 weeks, one could argue, "Oh, well, you might as well just direct sow it." So that's when like I kind of flip a coin. This year I want to start those things indoors. It all is going to depend on my schedule, timing, how everything else is moving about in the garden in my personal life. And it's like my default would be direct sowing them. My preference is to grow them, sow the seed where they're going to live. But because of in my garden, I've had trouble with bugs eating my seedlings when they emerge after they've been direct sowed, I feel safer and I feel like my chances increase of getting an actual plant to grow if I transplant it in.
yeah.
But that's me in my garden. That's not always been the case. It's kind of like the environment my garden is now. That's where I'm at. So those are the reasons why you would have me do something like that. I want to go with winter squash. I think the best chance of me getting a nice winter squash harvest because those are longer growing crops different than cucumbers. Cucumbers are quick to germinate, quick to grow, quicker to produce compared to a winter squash plant like butternut squash could take 110 days. So if I could get ahead by 30 days by starting those inside and then getting them transplanted, I'm better off than starting from day 0 by direct sowing them. That's me in my climate, knowing that my hot weather is going to wrap up about September.
Yeah.
And it's, who knows what the weather is going to be like in October. Who knows? Timeanddate.com, past weather.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, if you think about it too, it's like when you start the plant and you go to, so all of these are very frost sensitive plants.
Hmm.
Does that mean that if it's 35 degrees, they're going to die? No. But what that means is if it's 35 degrees, they're going to get stunted. They could get hurt. They cannot do what they need to do. And a lot of them won't germinate when it's that cold. The seed will just sit there and rot. So what that means is, this is the point, Batavia, where we take that pin and now we're going to pull
Hmm.
it back out that we were talking about earlier. And what I'm referring to is your soil temperature. And look, don't get hung up on the soil temperature. If it's consistently above, and the key number here is 50 degrees, consistently above 50 degrees, then you can start to get to where you can put many, many things in the garden. Like, for instance, my last frost date is not until April 15th, but I don't plant my sweet potatoes until usually May 15th. And that's a solid month later. And that's simply because that allows me to get all of that warmth into the soil and get it to really enjoy being planted out instead of being stuck in the ground and really being too cold. So it's the same with everything else. You could absolutely take and stick a seed of a winter squash in the ground in, if my last frost date's April 15th, let's say May 1, but it probably won't be warm enough. So what happens is that seed will just kind of sit there, and if it doesn't rot, then it'll grow, but it'll grow slowly. Whereas if you take it and put it in, let's just say April 7th, because we warm up very quickly here, then you can really, it'll start and it'll take off and it'll
Mm-hmm,
grow.
mm-hmm.
So I use that Seminole pumpkin I grew last year that grew so big. I direct sowed that in like May 15th. I direct sowed it and it took off, but it was slow at first. But as it got hotter and hotter, and you'll see this with many plants like eggplants, melons, winter
Mm-hmm.
squashes, black eyed peas, okras, as it gets hotter, they grow more because that's what they want. So it's really important to understand that because we need to get into the hardening off process and why that last frost date's important for that.
I was already harvesting some of those black-eyed peas. I'm starved.
Yeah, we've been
That is
enjoying
absolutely, if you're watching the video, this motion is absolutely me rubbing my belly.
them.
Uh, so hardening off, my 2 cents being short, because I've gone a little bit long on most of these responses, is, I'm never hardening off any summer things before my average last frost date as a rule. So I'm gonna start there. I'll pass
Okay.
the mic.
So I do, and that's because my weather will allow me to.
Mhm.
And when I say my weather will allow me to, I wish I was lying because I know Batavia is going to secretly hate me and make a comment about it in the future. So I just pointed out in March, we can be 70 degrees and 50 degrees, 70 in the day, 50 in the day, 75 in the day, 55. We can easily
Mhm.
be that, but we always have that possibility. And so I'm like super laser focused on the forecast. So I can be hardening off beforehand, but what that means is I need to be prepared to bring everything back inside if it gets cold. And there's times where I will have a fully hardened off vegetable and it will sit on my porch for 2 to 3 weeks, and I'll bring it in 8 times over that period just to make sure that that it's protected. So, and even then, after the first frost date comes, it can still sit there for a couple weeks, or usually it's about a week afterwards. I usually start getting my tomatoes in the ground about a week afterwards, and it's solely just watching the weather to make sure I get that timing right.
So you mentioned you do it earlier because your weather allows you to, and I'm not because of my weather,
Yeah.
right? So I'm looking at off camera timeanddate.com. So the April 2024 schedule for weather, I have highs in the 60s and 70s, kind of the week before my average last frost date, and I have lows as low as 45. That's not the end of the world,
No.
but I'd like it to be a little bit warmer as a low. And it brings me to a really important point. Don't look at the warmest part of the day when we talk about these summer plants and hardening them off and planting them. You really want to pay attention to the nighttime temps, which generally are going to be your low temps for the day. That's really important when it comes to we're trying to be careful and not put our plants in harm's way, right? And so that's a part of the reason why I don't plant my sweet potato plants until I get into June. Now, again, I think that's probably one of the last ones that I'll push to go much earlier. Maybe it's the first week of June and not the second week like I normally do.
Right.
I think that those are just so much more tender. It's a tropical plant, right? I've seen cold damage on sweet potato leaves, not necessarily the roots or the vines, but sweet potato leaves. I've seen cold damage from plants that are outdoors. And we're talking about temperatures that are probably in the high 40s as a low, and that's 40 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe even in the 50s, right? So in an ideal world, I'd get up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit as a low for my sweet potatoes, but I'd be like in July planting them. And
Yeah.
back to Young Man's point, do I have enough time for that plant to grow, to produce in the way that I want it to produce? The
And
later I get, the less likely I'm going to have the produce,
yeah.
the harvest that I want.
And some of these plants will absolutely let you know when it's too cold. Now, when
Mhm.
if my plant has been out and my tomatoes have been hardened off and it gets to 45 degrees, I'm not overly concerned about that. What I'm
Mm-hmm.
concerned about is the wind at night, making it cooler around them. So, you could throw a towel over them or something like that. But once we get them in the ground, what we really want to look for is a period where it's not going to be stressful for them. So you just want to look for a couple days where they can get in the ground. You don't want to put them in the ground super early. You want to get them in and then let them kind of enjoy nice temperatures, let them settle. And then if it comes in, fine. But you want to be able to protect them too. So, any way you can cover them if you get a little bit of coolness, you can. But I think the point is we always want to try, let me rephrase that. I always want to try to get it in as early as I can, but as safely as possible. I want my cake and I want to eat it too. And I want the icing on it. You know what I mean? Like
So
that's what I want.
yeah, so when we talk about uh, the we want to go ahead and get the thing planted, and 40 something may not be a problem, and 50 something is more ideal. Whenever you get to the point of actually transplanting it in, if you have the luxury, even though it's completely hardened off, my preference is to harden it off and then plant it out on an overcast day.
Yeah.
Right? So my seedlings may have been sitting in the sun for days and days because, again, they're completely hardened off. That's one of the steps with hardening off a tomato plant and other summer loving plants and plants in general. But there is a level of trauma that the plant is experiencing going from whatever growing medium it's in to the actual ground. And if you can do that before, right around a overcast day, maybe before, and this is tricky, like a light rain, that's more ideal.
Yeah.
You want to avoid putting them in the ground when you have high winds. You want to avoid the sunniest part of the day putting them into the ground. My recommendation, as those last two notes are, you want to avoid heavy rains coming in and you putting those plants into the ground. Um, Most times they will acclimate, but let's create the better scenario for them to actually complete the transplant process.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, look, we can't all wait for a cloudy day. Sometimes they just don't come, but planting them in the evening or covering them that first day, anything like that will help.
Hmm.
So, that being
Oh,
said,
one of the tricks real quick. I have the cheap landscape fabric that's like it's no good for landscape, like weed barrier fabric, but I bought it for some other project a couple of years back, and I've used that. So if it's not that, it's a shade cloth if you already have it. That has been super helpful when it comes to me transplanting things in and helping them acclimate, giving them a little bit of shade, in those first couple of days as I'm transplanting them in. So that's just a trick. I don't do it every single time, but I found it helpful when I do it.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Anytime you can set up shade to help ease the process, it helps. So,
Mhm.
that being said, we do need to tell you that the Planter app is a longtime supporter of the show, and we bring it up because, again, when you talk about all of these planting dates, you definitely want to utilize it and plan out your garden so you get the layout that you want. It's a very useful. It is a drag and drop interface, square foot gardening centric. Everything is basically square foot in the garden because that's how we measure it, but it works out well. It's got a seed box, so it keeps track of all your seeds, flowers out the wazoo. So you can plan for that. Because let's face it, this is Garden 2.0 season. This is the planting season, so we can get to planting. So check it out. Use the link below to get yourself a discount. And it is the Planter app available on the Google and Apple Play stores. Ding. Okay, so we've got a question of the day, Batavia. I'm going to give you an option. Do you want to answer a question or do you want me to go over how I start my sweet potato slips?
Both.
Only one. We only got time for one.
Let's go over how you start your sweet potato slips.
Okay. So, a reason why is because we're talking about timing and everything.
And
Um,
this is also how I now start them too. So
yeah.
go for it.
So, you timing is very important. And what I'll say about the timing portion of this is you can take a sweet potato and you can start the slips. And if you have too much time, you can remove the slip if it has a little bit of a root on it and then stick it in some water and then kind of keep the sweet potato going. so we can do that. So what I do is I have a tray. It's seed starting trays are sold 10 by 20 inches, and I fill it up with dirt. It's got holes in it, and I put, you can use like a tinfoil tray, whatever you want. And what I do is I take my sweet potato. Ideally, it would have little bits of slips in it already. What do we call those, Batavia? They were, we used to joke about it a lot. Chitting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It'll be chitting. So I love the term, but chitting. So you put that in, you cover it with soil. Now you want to put a heat mat underneath that soil, get that soil nice and damp, and then put a dome over it because that heat and that humidity. Remember, sweet potatoes are a tropical plant. So they're going to start their process much faster. And then that's how we do it. So you cover up the sweet potato and then they'll come up. Usually they only come from one end of the sweet potato as well. And the other thing is you don't need a giant sweet potato, okay? I typically use sweet potatoes that are probably, I'm holding up two fingers if you're watching YouTube, probably anywhere from two fingers to one finger thick. They're usually the scraps that I have left over. And one sweet potato about a finger or two wide will give me upwards of 8 sweet potato slips. And one thing I did last year as well is, so I started them way too early and they got really big and I ended up cutting them in half. And then I would take the top half, stick it in the water, and then it would grow roots. So I was able to do that. And then what I do, just to kind of put the icing on the cake, I stick them in soil and like a seeds tray. You know, those 6 packs, I'll stick one in each one. You want plenty of soil so you start to get roots not wrapping but growing more actively. And so once you get those hardened off and you get those into the ground, then you will start to have more growth because they already have roots, they're ready to go. The problem with ordering slips and stuff like that is you don't really have any roots when you get them. The plants are usually rather beat up and they've
Hmm.
got to recover. It's just kind of, it doesn't work well. So that's basically what I do. The really important part is heat and humidity, heat and humidity, heat and humidity. I told you 3 times, don't forget. It's changed the game for me. I don't stick a potato in water anymore, and I'm gonna be straight up because when you stick it in water, it smells like a fart when it starts to rot, and I don't like that. I
All
mean,
right. So my moving along, my 2 cents. The only thing that I do differently is the contraption that I use when I start them. So I'll use like a tomato, those plastic containers that give you tomatoes in, like it already has holes in it. I'll use something like that, some type of plastic vessel. If it doesn't have holes, I'll put holes in it. I have started some things in the 10 by 20s and put holes in it. I've not done that with sweet potatoes. I may do it this year. That's the only thing I've done differently. The with my successful starts. Last year, I had the best sweet potato slips that ultimately go out into soil and then transplanted into the garden. This is where we're using our tools, right? So the reason why I knew this would work when it came to moving the slips into soil before they go into the garden is because that's how I bought sweet potato plants from the garden. They came in 6 packs. So I planted those that came in packs a couple of years ago and had success. So I knew I could mimic that, right? It's another good example of these plants are further along. I'm erring on the side of caution when we talked about the temperature and all of that, but to plant just the slip itself that has roots, there's still that level of a different level of acclimation that it needs to do when it goes into the soil. I do want to, so I approve the ad that Ben just did for starting sweet potato slips. That is the way that I will do it going forward. I do want to note that I've done it suspending them in water. I've had probably a 33% success rate with it. I've done it where I've put them just in soil. So the same way that young Ben described, but with no heat, no humidity dome. Not that much success, actually 0% success. So I've also, let's see, I've also done like a sweet potato directly outside into, because of the space I had, a container. So I've directly planted a sweet potato that maybe has some chitting that's happening. So you have a little, vines, and I put it directly inside of the ground. That's one of the common questions. What, can I just plant the potato? It produced some sweet potatoes, but I'm talking about like two or three or four, what you would call, think about baby white potatoes. It's that size for a sweet potato. And that's just a waste of my growing time and space, quite frank. As a matter of fact, I've done it for the aesthetics, for the vines that grow out, because they will grow vines. They just won't grow the tubers when you do it that way.
So, yeah, just to kind of put a couple things into perspective. If you put the potato just in the ground, it will not produce a potato.
I'm
Um,
telling you that it will.
it will, but the way that it does is because that slip had branched off and
Hmm.
created something small. So the initial function of it is not to produce a potato. The way that
Okay.
we
You won't be
wanted,
satisfied with it.
you will absolutely not. So you have to remove the slip. And the other thing that I will say is the reason why I put them in the soil is the same reason why you did, because I had purchased them like that in the past. And
Hmm.
then last year I also purchased some in soil and I planted mine out. No, it was the year before. It was a year before and I did not do that. So, but I planted them out that I bought. And what I noticed when I harvested them, all the sweet potatoes were all mangled and bent around each other because they were overgrown in that seed starting pot. So I was very careful about that, to the point last year where I pulled them out, and if they were too root bound, like they were starting to
Yeah.
wrap, I would just get rid of them. I wouldn't even
Yeah.
plant them because there's no point in having a ball of like you can't break them apart, so they would just
Hmm.
rot. So yeah, but that's why I did it too, and I think that's a really important thing to point out. But Tavia, I like that you pointed that out. Is you've seen it done,
Hmm.
now mimic it and make it better, and
Hmm.
that's how you get better at gardening and
Yeah.
raising your, and look, I don't, it's more than gardening, it's raising your own food,
Hmm.
it's breaking yourself from the chain of food, the food network, and
Vegetable by vegetable. Yeah.
yeah, one piece at a time. So
Hmm.
that's how I do my sweet potatoes, and that's the only way I'll do my sweet potatoes. Couple things to kind of add in though: if you don't have a heat mat, you can do it on top of your refrigerator. Your refrigerator makes releases heat when it's on, so that will help. Just make sure you put a cover on it. Even a sunny windowsill will help get it started. I don't subscribe to that it's enough light, but the heat coming in from the sun will help get that heat to get those slips going. And a lot of times you can just put a potato up there a month before you even do it, and it'll start that chitting process. And I just got to say, too, I love saying the word chitting. It's so great.
Last year, I started my sweet potato process. I think it was March the 13th. I'll be starting closer to the end of February this year for me. Remember, my sweet potatoes, the plants themselves, as I plant them out, they're not going into the garden until more like the first week of June. So when you do that math, understand that there's a lot of growth between the time of me starting and the time of me planting them out based on my weather. If you're using a heat mat in general, as well as for sweet potatoes, just keep an eye on watering. Again, they're going to dry things out faster than if they weren't sitting on a heat mat.
Yep. And also get yourself a quart jar and fill that quart jar up with water. And then just, when, like I said, take your knife.
Hmm.
And I mean it when I say knife, and you go in and you cut right at the base of that sweet potato slip. And when you
Yeah.
cut at the base of that slip, you're going to get a piece of that root. But what you also want to do after that is there's a little white curve at the bottom. Go ahead and cut that curve off and just leave one root on there if you can. One little itty bitty root, but cut that curve off, because if there's any disease or anything inside of that sweet potato slip, that's where it's at. So you're eliminating disease from the mother plant. So cut
It's a
that
great
little
point.
white piece off. You'll see it when you cut it off. And then you stick that into that cup of water, and you can keep that same sweet potato will continue producing until you're
Hmm.
ready to throw it out. And I even left them out. I took the tray out and left it outside last year. I was like, I didn't know what to do
Hmm.
with it. And I had like 30 more slips grow off of them. So, you can keep going that way. And then you can plant
And
them
that
in your yard.
lasts that last bit is more like, again, propagating, so if you do any kind of, take a clipping from a plant, a regular, house plant, that it's the same idea once you get to the point of having the glass of water,
Yeah.
or the quart of water.
I love propagating. That's my favorite thing to do.
I
All
know you
right.
do.
That's it, everybody. So thank you for watching the Backyard Gardens podcast. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by becoming a patron, becoming a subscriber. Hit our Amazon list, buy some seeds, code YBBBB for a couple more days. You can get yourself a discount. And check us out on our YouTubes as well, where we are continuing to help in our own voices without each other influencing each other too much, even though we do influence each other, but it's different. So come check us out. And remember, on that note, we do two things. We learn to grow and we grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.